Lost Media.
As a child, I was captivated by the bizarre yet intriguing world of Smile Time. The characters, with their eerily expressive masks, inhabited a world that felt both familiar and otherworldly. Smiley, with his perpetual grin, was the leader, always ready for an adventure. Crybaby, his droopy eyes and teary demeanor, was the group's reluctant participant, constantly fearful yet endearing. Grumpy's furrowed brows and scowling mouth reflected his perpetual dissatisfaction with everything around him. Spooky, the only female character, had a mask that depicted shock, her wide eyes and open mouth giving her a permanently startled expression. The episodes were simple, usually involving the characters embarking on mundane adventures that quickly spiraled into absurdity. They might start with something as benign as planting a garden or building a tree house, but by the end, they were facing bizarre and often frightening challenges. Despite the dark undertones, the show was hypnotic. The odd juxtaposition of cheerful scenarios with unsettling visuals created a unique charm that kept me coming back. Parents, however, were less enchanted. They found the characters' soulless black eyes and grotesque mouths disturbing, expressing concern about the show's impact on children. Looking back, I can see why there was something deeply unsettling about those masks. The expressions never changed, even when the characters were clearly in distress. It was as if their faces were frozen in time, a stark contrast to their animated bodies. Despite these concerns, Smile Time was wildly popular among kids. It had a substantial viewership, and merchandise sales were through the roof. The studio seemed to be on the verge of something big, but then, almost overnight, it all came crashing down. The show was canceled, the studio shut its doors, and Smile Time faded into obscurity. Years later, as an adult, my curiosity about the show was reignited. I found myself scouring the internet for any information I could find about Smile Time. However, my search yielded little. The studio had vanished without a trace, leaving behind scant evidence of its existence. No official records, no comprehensive Wikipedia page, just fragments of information scattered across obscure forums. Then, during a routine visit to a local garage sale, I stumbled upon a dusty old VHS tape with the familiar Smile Time logo. My heart raced with excitement and trepidation. Could this be a recording of the elusive show? I bought it for a pittance, eager to relive a piece of my childhood. The tape itself was unremarkable, its label faded and peeling. But when I played it, I was transported back to those strange, captivating episodes. The animation was cruder than I remembered, the colors more muted. The characters move with a jerky, almost unnatural fluidity. Yet there was no denying it. This was Smile Time. I began to research the studio that produced the show, hoping to uncover more about its mysterious demise. What I found was chilling. Several employees had gone missing on the studio grounds shortly before it closed. The official reports were vague, filled with bureaucratic language that offered no real answers. Unsettled but undeterred, I continued my investigation. I decided to sell the tape on eBay, hoping to attract other enthusiasts who might share my curiosity. The response was immediate. Within hours, I received several offers. Most were mundane, typical transactions, but one message stood out. The sender warned me in no uncertain terms to destroy the tape before something terrible happened. Their words were filled with urgency and fear, but I dismissed it as a prank. However, strange occurrences around my house started. The noises outside grew louder, more insistent. I set up a camera to capture whatever was causing the disturbances, but it was destroyed within a day. Frustrated and on edge, I reviewed the footage. It showed shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, their faces obscured by masks eerily similar to those worn by the Smile Time characters. I began to experience vivid nightmares. In one, I was a child again, wandering through a twisted version of the Smile Time world. The characters were there, but their expressions were twisted into grotesque parodies of their former selves. Smiley's grin was a rictus of pain, Kribbeby's tears were blood, Grumpy's scowl was a mask of rage, and Spooky's shocked expression was one of genuine terror. I woke up drenched in sweat, the echoes of their haunting laughter ringing in my ears. The situation escalated when I learned that the person who told me to destroy the tape had been brutally murdered. Their home was ransacked, and the police had no leads. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with possibilities. Could this be connected to the tape? Was it possible that the curse was real? Desperate for answers, I delved deeper into the online theories. One particularly chilling theory suggested that the Smile Time suits were more than just costumes. According to this theory, the suits could become new bodies through a blood sacrifice, allowing the wearer to inhabit them indefinitely. It sounded absurd, but given the increasingly bizarre events surrounding me, I couldn't dismiss it outright. I reviewed the footage from my broken camera again. This time I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background, barely visible, was a figure wearing a mask that looked exactly like Smiley's. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the implications. These weren't just random intruders. They were somehow connected to the show. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fear. I barely slept, jumping at every noise. I barricaded myself in my house, but the sense of being watched never left me. One night, as I was packing the tape for its beer, I saw movement outside my window. This time, I knew it wasn't my imagination. I grabbed a baseball bat and went outside, ready to confront whoever or whatever was out there. But when I got outside, I found nothing but darkness and silence. That night, I wrote an update to the beer of the tape and told them that I will be throwing the tape away, and I wrote a note along with the tape, hoping to warn whoever might find it. My hands trembled as I typed, the sense of impending doom growing stronger with each passing minute. The tape must remain lost. Watching it seems to invite malevolent entities into our world. I could not bring myself to destroy the tape out of fear, so I'll just throw it away. As I hit send, I heard a crash downstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. I grabbed the baseball bat and slowly made my way down the stairs. The house was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I moved cautiously, trying to control my breathing. In the living room, I saw them, 3 figures, their faces obscured by the familiar masks of Smiley, Crybaby, and Grumpy. They stood motionless, their black eyes staring at me. For a moment, we were all frozen, the air thick with tension. Then they moved, slowly, deliberately. They advanced towards me. I swung the bat, but it passed through them as if they were made of smoke. Panic surged through me as I realized I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding. I turned and ran, but they were everywhere. No matter where I went, the masked figures were there, their presence suffocating. I could hear their voices, a distorted chorus of the familiar Smile Time characters. I locked myself in my room, typing out this final document in a desperate attempt to warn whoever might find it. The tape must remain lost. Watching it seems to invite malevolent entities into our world. As I hear the intruders getting closer, I know my time is running out. Goodbye. Authorities found the house in disarray, with no sign of the document's author. The camera footage revealed haunting images of shadowy figures, their faces obscured by grotesque masks. Despite a thorough investigation, no trace of the intruders was ever found. The Smile Time tape disappeared, its whereabouts unknown. Rumors about its curse spread, and the few who claimed to have seen it reported eerie encounters and unexplainable phenomena. The legend of Smile Time grew, becoming a chilling piece of lost media lore. Those who knew of its existence either stayed silent or warned others to steer clear, lest they too attract the sinister forces that had claimed yet another victim.
Paralyzed nights.
I've experienced sleep paralysis quite a few times, but one particular incident made me reconsider my skepticism about the paranormal. It happened when I was 12. My family often had open discussions about paranormal activities. They never denied their existence, unlike me. I always clung to the belief that science could explain everything. Despite living on a street infamous for its high number of suicides and murders, 10 suicides and to murders within 2 years. To be precise, I dismissed any supernatural explanations with the firm science. I had developed a habit of covering my face with a blanket while sleeping. Somehow, my mom always sensed when I was having sleep paralysis and would move my body to break the spell. Now I wonder if it was my mom every time. One morning, as usual, I woke up with my face covered by the blanket, but I quickly realized something was wrong. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis had me in its grip again. Despite my familiarity with it, the experience always terrified me. I was sweating and struggling to breathe under the stifling blanket. Panic set in, and I genuinely thought that day would be my last. Then a baby-sized hand touched my forehead. It was warm. Through the thin fabric of the blanket, illuminated by the morning sunlight, I saw the clear shadow of a tiny hand. Slowly it moved away, and the paralysis broke. I could move again. I frantically searched for an explanation. My younger brother was my first thought, but he wasn't in my room. Besides, his hands were bigger than mine. What really unsettled me was my mom's and grandmother's reactions. They didn't dismiss my story. Instead, they focused on solutions to help me avoid such experiences in the future, never providing a logical explanation. My mom had experienced worse things, and I knew I'd eventually share more of our stories. But this incident stood out because it was the only time I felt and saw something so vividly. The days following that morning were filled with an eerie silence in our household. The usual sounds of life seemed distant, as if muffled by an unseen force. I became hyper-aware of every creak and whisper in the old house, each one sending chills down my spine. One evening, My curiosity got the better of me. I approached my mom while she was in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she prepared dinner. The comforting aroma of spices filled the air, but it did little to calm my nerves. "Mom, can we talk about what happened the other morning?" I asked hesitantly. She paused, knife hovering over a half-chopped onion. "What do you want to know, sweetie?" I swallowed hard. "Have you ever experienced anything like that? You know, the tiny hand?" She turned to face me, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else. "Fear? Maybe, yes, I have many times. Our family has always been sensitive to these things, but we don't talk about them openly because it's not something we can explain." I felt a chill run down my spine. "But why us? Why this house?" She sighed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "This house has a history. Long before we moved in, it was known for strange occurrences. The previous owners left abruptly, but no one knew why. We only found out after we moved in. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the blanket pulled up to my chin, eyes wide open as I stared at the ceiling. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified. The tiny hand's touch replayed in my mind over and over again. A week later, I decided to dig deeper. I spent hours in the local library, sifting through old newspapers and records. What I found was disturbing. The house we lived in had a dark past. It was built in the early 1900s by a wealthy family who mysteriously disappeared. Subsequent owners reported strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, whispers in the night, and sightings of a small child. One article, in particular, caught my attention. It detailed the disappearance of a child named Lily in the 1950s. She was last seen playing in the yard of our house. Her parents searched for her frantically, but she was never found. The case went cold, and the family moved away, leaving the house abandoned for years. I felt a connection to Lily, as if her spirit had reached out to me. That night, armed with newfound knowledge, I decided to confront whatever was haunting us. I set up a makeshift altar in my room with candles and a photo of Lily I found in the newspaper. As midnight approached, I sat cross-legged on the floor, the flickering candle light casting eerie shadows on the walls. I closed my eyes and spoke softly. "Lily, if you're here, I want to help you. Show me a sign." The room grew cold, and a faint whisper filled the air.
"Help me."
My heart raced, but I stayed calm. "What do you need, Lily?"
"Find me."
The voice replied, barely audible. Suddenly, the candles went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a cold breeze pass over me, and the tiny hand touched my forehead once more. This time it wasn't frightening, it felt like a plea for help. Over the next few days I searched the house, looking for any clues about Lily's whereabouts. In the attic, hidden behind old boxes and forgotten belongings, I found a small, dusty chest. Inside was a collection of Lily's toys and a diary. The diary detailed Lily's life and her mysterious disappearance. On the last page, she wrote about a man who visited her at night, whispering strange things and leading her to a hidden room in the basement. My heart pounded as I realized the basement was the only place I hadn't searched. That night I armed myself with a flashlight and ventured into the basement. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. I searched every corner, tapping on walls for any hidden compartments. Finally, behind an old shelf, I found a small, concealed door. I pushed it open, and a wave of cold air hit me. Inside was a tiny, dimly lit room. In the center was a small skeleton surrounded by old, decayed toys. Tears filled my eyes as I realized I had found Lily. I carefully gathered her remains and took them upstairs. My mom helped me arrange a proper burial in our backyard. As we laid Lily to rest, I felt a profound sense of peace. The haunting stopped, and the house felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. From that day on, I never doubted the existence of the paranormal. Lily's spirit had reached out to me for help, and in finding her, I had given her the peace she deserved. My family and I continued to live in the house, but it was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of healing and remembrance. Years later, I still think of Lily and the tiny hand that touched my forehead. I often visit her grave, leaving flowers and toys, a reminder that she is not forgotten. The experience changed me, opening my mind to the mysteries of the world and the unseen forces that surround us.
Huggin' Molly.
I arrived in Abbeville, Alabama, on a late October evening. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your breath visible, and the town was eerily quiet. I had been driving for hours, chasing a story that had all but consumed me for the past few months. As a freelance journalist with a penchant for the paranormal, I'd heard countless tales, but none had gripped me quite like the legend of Huggin' Molly. I checked into a small, aging motel on the outskirts of town. The receptionist, an elderly woman with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple, eyed me suspiciously when I asked about Huggin' Molly. Her lips thinned into a tight line, and she simply handed me the key without a word. The room was modest, the decor straight out of the 1970s, but I was too exhausted to care. I dropped my bags and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering what I had gotten myself into. The next morning, I headed to the local library. The librarian, Mrs. Davis, was a pleasant woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back into a neat bun and eyes that twinkled with curiosity. When I mentioned Huggin' Molly, her expression changed, a shadow passing over her face. Huggin' Molly, she said quietly, is a legend as old as Abbeville itself. Some say she was a grieving mother who lost her child. Others believe she was a witch. Whatever the truth, she haunts our town, especially on cold nights like these. She led me to the archives, where I spent hours poring over old newspapers and town records. The stories were varied, but consistent in their chilling details. A ghostly figure dressed in black, chasing children and giving them bone-crushing hugs. Some accounts spoke of children who were never the same after their encounter, their spirits broken by the ghost's embrace. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Davis handed me a worn leather-bound book. This is a collection of personal accounts from the townsfolk. She said it might give you more insight. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing whispers in the wind, and the old motel room seemed to creak and groan with every gust. Around midnight I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The streets were deserted. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. I wandered aimlessly, lost in thought, until I found myself near the edge of town. The moon cast an eerie glow over the landscape, and I shivered. pulling my jacket tighter around me. That's when I felt it, a sudden chill, like ice water running down my spine. I turned around, and there she was, hugging Molly. She stood about 50 feet away, a tall, shadowy figure dressed in black, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away slowly, but she moved with surprising speed. Before I knew it, she was inches from me, her icy breath on my face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her arms wrapped around me, and I felt the crushing weight of her hug. It was as if she was trying to squeeze the life out of me. My vision blurred, and I struggled to break free, but her grip was unyielding. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. When I looked up, she was gone, leaving only the cold night and an overwhelming sense of dread. The next day, I sought out more locals to hear their stories. One by one, they recounted their own encounters with Ugg and Molly, each tale more harrowing than the last. I met Sarah, a middle-aged woman who had grown up in Abbeville. She remembered her encounter with Molly vividly, describing the sensation of being hugged by an unseen force as a child. I was walking home from my friend's house, Sarah said, her voice trembling. It was late, and I knew I should have been home before dark. Suddenly, I felt this icy chill, and then arms around me, squeezing so tight I couldn't breathe. When I was finally able to break free, I ran home as fast as I could. My parents said I was just imagining things, but I knew what I felt. Another local, Mr. Thompson, a grizzled old man with a face like worn leather, recounted a similar experience. Back when I was a boy, he said, we used to dare each other to go out at night and see if we could find her. One night I did, and I wish I hadn't. That hug. It felt like she was trying to crush the soul right out of me. As I listened to their stories, I realized that Hug and Molly was more than just a ghost story. She was a part of the town's fabric, a dark thread woven into its history. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to visit the old cemetery on the outskirts of town. It was said that Hug and Molly's grave was there, though no one had ever been able to find it. Armed with a flashlight and the leather-bound book Mrs. Davis had given me, I made my way through the overgrown graveyard. The night was deathly silent. The only sound was the crunch of my footsteps on the fallen leaves. I wandered among the tombstones, some so old the inscriptions had worn away, until I found a secluded corner. There, partially hidden by a tangle of vines, was a headstone that looked different from the rest. I cleared away the vegetation and shone my flashlight on the inscription. It read, Molly Crenshaw, beloved mother. Taken too soon, my heart raced as I realized I had found her grave. The book had mentioned Molly Crenshaw, a woman who had lost her child under mysterious circumstances. Could this be Hug and Molly? As I stood there, I felt the temperature drop suddenly. My breath fogged in the air, and I knew I was not alone. I turned slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and there she was again. This time her eyes glowed brighter, and I could see the sadness etched into her ghostly face. She moved towards me, and I braced myself for the crushing hug, but instead she stopped a few feet away, her eyes pleading. It was as if she was trying to communicate something, but I couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. Back at the motel, I pored over the book, searching for clues. There was a passage that caught my eye, a letter written by Molly Crenshaw herself. It spoke of her grief over losing her child and her desire to protect other children from the same fate. Could it be that Huggin Molly wasn't a malevolent spirit, but a guardian of sorts? The next morning, I visited Mrs. Davis again, sharing my findings. She listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps Molly's spirit is trapped," she said, bound by her grief and unable to move on. Together, we devised a plan. That night, I returned to the cemetery, this time with Mrs. Davis. We brought flowers and a candle, creating a small memorial at Molly's grave. As we stood there, the air grew cold, and once again, Huggin Molly appeared. But this time there was no fear. Her ghostly form seemed to soften, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the woman she once was, a grieving mother, lost and alone. We stood in silence, offering our respects, and slowly her form began to fade. There was a sense of peace in the air, a release of the tension that had gripped the town for so long. In the days that followed, the stories of Huggin Molly became less frequent. The townsfolk felt a sense of relief, as if a dark cloud had lifted. I stayed in Abbeville for a few more weeks, documenting the change and speaking with the locals. The sense of fear that had once permeated the town was replaced with a cautious optimism. Before I left, I visited Molly's grave one last time. The flowers we had left were still there, a small token of our gratitude. As I stood there, I felt a gentle breeze, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard a whisper of thanks. I drove away from Abbeville with a sense of accomplishment. I had come looking for a ghost story and found something much deeper, a tale of loss, grief, and ultimately peace. Huggin Molly would always be a part of Abbeville's history, but now she could rest. Years later, I still think about Huggin Molly. The story became one of my most popular articles, sparking interest in paranormal enthusiasts and skeptics alike. I received countless letters from readers who had their own tales of ghostly encounters, but none quite like Molly's. Every October, I make a trip back to Abbeville. The town has changed over the years, but the memory of Huggin Molly remains. I visit her grave, leaving flowers and a candle, a small gesture to honor the spirit that once haunted the town. And each time, as I stand in that old cemetery, I feel a sense of connection to the past. Huggin Molly may have been a ghost, but in her own way, she brought the town together. She reminded us of the power of love, even in death, and the importance of remembering those who came before us. As I drive away, the wind whispers through the trees, and I like to think that somewhere Molly is at peace, her spirit finally free.
Kashtaka.
The first snow had just begun to fall as my plane touched down in Juneau, Alaska. The cold bit at my skin through my jacket, a stark reminder of how far from home I was. I was here chasing a story that had fascinated me since childhood. The Kushtaka, shape-shifting creatures from Tlingit folklore. Known to transform into otters or men, these beings were said to be both mischievous and dangerous. I checked into a small bed and breakfast near the harbor. The proprietor, a grizzled fisherman named Hank, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned the Kushtaka. "You're either very brave or very foolish to be looking for them," he said with a chuckle. His laugh didn't reach his eyes, which remained serious and wary. After settling into my room, I went for a walk along the harbor. The icy wind whipped off the water, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Fishermen were busy preparing their boats, their voices carrying over the sound of the waves. I stopped to chat with a few of them, asking if they had ever encountered the kushtaka. Most laughed it off, calling it an old wives' tale, but a few exchanged nervous glances. "I've seen things," one man said, his voice low. "Otters standing upright, watching us with eyes too intelligent to be animal. Be careful out there." The next morning, I visited the local museum to learn more about the Tlingit folklore surrounding the kushtaka. The curator, a woman named Eliza, welcomed me warmly. She led me to a dimly lit exhibit filled with artifacts and artwork depicting the legendary creatures. The Tlingit believe that the kushtaka are spirits who can transform into otters or men, Eliza explained. They're known to lure people away from safety, especially during storms or foggy weather. Some say they steal souls, while others believe they're protectors, saving those lost in the wilderness. I spent hours studying the intricate carvings and masks, each one telling a different story about the kushtaka. One particular carving caught my eye. It depicted a man being surrounded by otters, their eyes glinting with a mischievous, almost malevolent intelligence. Eliza noticed my interest. "That one is particularly famous," she said. "It's said to be based on a true story. A fisherman went missing, and when he was found, he spoke of otters standing like men, guiding him through the fog." Armed with knowledge and a growing sense of curiosity, I set out to the nearby village of Angoon, where sightings of the kushtaka were reportedly more frequent. The journey was treacherous, with icy roads and thick forest closing in on either side. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I arrived at Angoon in the late afternoon. The village was small, with brightly colored houses and a close-knit community. I introduced myself to the village elder, a man named Jacob. His weathered face broke into a smile when I mentioned the kushtaka. "They've been part of our stories for generations," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Many here have seen them. Some are afraid. Others believe they're guardians. It depends on what the kushtaka wants from you." Jacob agreed to introduce me to some of the villagers who had encountered the shapeshifters. That evening, we gathered around a roaring fire, the cold kept at bay by the warmth of the flames and the stories being shared. One man, Peter, spoke of a fishing trip that had turned eerie. "We were out on the water when a thick fog rolled in," he said, his eyes distant. "We heard splashing and saw otters in the water, but they were different. They stood on their hind legs, watching us. One even mimicked my movements, like it was mocking me." Another woman, Agnes, recounted a time when she was lost in the woods. "I heard voices, like people calling my name," she said. "I followed them, thinking it was my family, but I found myself surrounded by otters. They led me back to the path, but their eyes, they weren't animal eyes." Determined to experience the legend firsthand, I decided to venture deeper into the wilderness. Jacob warned me to be cautious, providing me with supplies and a map of the area. "The kushtaka are most active near the water," he said. "Stay alert and don't stray from the path." I hiked along the coast, the landscape both beautiful and forbidding. The dense forest pressed in from one side, while the ocean stretched out on the other. As dusk fell, the temperature plummeted, and a heavy fog rolled in, blanketing everything in a ghostly shroud. I set up camp near a small cove, the sound of the waves lulling me into a false sense of security. As the fire crackled and the shadows danced, I felt a sudden chill. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the distinct feeling that I was not alone. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the area. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing but trees and rocks. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned the light towards the water and froze. Standing at the edge of the cove were 3 otters, but they were unlike any I had seen before. They stood on their hind legs, watching me intently. Their eyes glowed with an eerie intelligence, and I could swear they were studying me. I took a step back, my heart pounding. The otters moved in unison, matching my movements. One of them raised a paw, mimicking my gesture. It was uncanny, almost human-like. I knew then that these were no ordinary otters. The fog thickened, and the temperature dropped even further. My breath came out in visible puffs as I tried to maintain my composure. The otters continued to watch me, their eyes reflecting the light of the fire. I decided to speak, my voice trembling slightly. "What do you want?" I asked, feeling foolish for talking to animals. But deep down, I knew they were listening. To my astonishment, one of the otters tilted its head and stepped forward. It shifted and grew, its form becoming more human-like until a man stood before me. His features were sharp, almost otherworldly, and his eyes retained the same glint as the otters. "We are the Kushtaka," he said, his voice a low, melodic whisper. "We mean you no harm, but you seek us out. Why?" I stammered, trying to find my voice. "I wanted to understand your story, to learn why you're here and what you want from us." The Kushtaka man nodded. "We are guardians and tricksters. We protect those who are lost, but we also test them. Your kind has forgotten the old ways, the balance of nature. We remind you." I felt a strange sense of come wash over me. Despite the fear, there was a profound wisdom in his words. "What should I do?" I asked. "Respect the land and its spirits," he replied. "Remember the old stories and honor them. We are not your enemies, but we are not to be taken lightly." With that, he began to shift back into his otter form, the transformation both mesmerizing and unsettling. The 3 otters disappeared into the fog, leaving me alone by the fire. I returned to Angoon the next day, my mind racing with the encounter. Jacob and the villagers listened intently as I recounted what had happened. There was a sense of awe and respect in their eyes. "You've been touched by the Kushtaka," Jacob said. "Few outsiders have had such an experience. Remember what they told you." One spent a few more days in the village, learning more about the Tlingit culture and their relationship with the land and its spirits. The stories of the Kushtaka took on a new meaning, no longer just folklore, but a living part of their heritage. When it was time to leave, I felt a deep connection to the place and its people. The journey back to Juneau was filled with reflection. I had come seeking a ghost story and found something far richer, a lesson in respect and harmony with nature. Back home, I wrote about my experience, weaving together the accounts of the villagers and my own encounter. The article resonated with many, sparking a renewed interest in Tlingit folklore and the Kushtaka. Readers wrote to me, sharing their own stories, and seeking to understand the deeper meaning behind the legends. The kushtaka became a symbol of the delicate balance between humans and nature, a reminder of the old ways that we must not forget. Every year, I return to Alaska, visiting Angoon and the villagers who welcome me so warmly. I pay my respects to the land and its spirits, leaving offerings at the edge of the cove where I first saw the kushtaka. And each time as I stand by the water, I feel a sense of peace. The kushtaka are there, watching, reminding me of the lessons I learned. They are a part of the land, as am I, and in that connection, I find a deeper understanding of the world and my place within it. Years later, the legend of the kushtaka continues to fascinate and inspire. My story has been shared widely, drawing attention to the rich cultural heritage of the Tlingit people. I've spoken at conferences and written books, but the most meaningful moments are those spent in quiet reflection by the Alaskan waters. The kushtaka taught me that legends are more than just stories. They are lessons from the past, guiding us towards a better future. They remind us to respect the land, honor its spirits, and maintain the delicate balance that sustains us all. As I stand by the cove, the wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the ancient wisdom of the kushtaka, and in that moment I know I am not alone.
Obsession.
Riley stood in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The small, dimly lit apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the gentle sound of a child breathing in her sleep. Riley's eyes scanned the room, a strange mixture of fear and satisfaction etched on her face. Miko lay in the corner, nestled in a makeshift bed of blankets and pillows. The soft glow of the moonlight from the window caressed her peaceful face, and Riley felt a surge of possessive protectiveness wash over her. Ever since that fateful day when she found Miko, Riley's life had taken a dark turn. She knew the world was cruel and unforgiving, but in Miko she found something pure, something worth protecting. Riley had sworn to herself that she would keep Miko safe no matter the cost. Riley, a high school junior at Shadow Creek High, was known for her impeccable grades and quiet demeanor. She was the kind of girl who blended into the background, never causing trouble, always polite. But beneath that calm exterior, Riley harbored a darkness that even she didn't fully understand. One rainy afternoon, as she walked home from school, Riley noticed a small figure huddled under a tattered umbrella at the park. The child's clothes were dirty, and she looked scared and alone. Riley's heart ached for the girl, and without thinking, she approached her.
"Hi there.
Riley said softly, kneeling down to the girl's level.
Are you lost?"
The girl looked up, her large, doe-like eyes filled with tears. She nodded silently.
"Where are your parents?"
Riley asked gently. The girl shook her head, and Riley understood. She had no one. Without hesitation, Riley took the girl's hand and led her to her apartment. She couldn't explain why, but she felt an overwhelming need to protect this child. Riley's apartment was small but cozy. She lived alone, having emancipated herself from her neglectful parents. She led Miko inside, gave her a warm bath, and dressed her in clean clothes. The child, who had introduced herself as Miko, seemed to relax in Riley's presence. Days turned into weeks, and Miko became a part of Riley's life. Riley's friends at school noticed a change in her. She seemed happier, more vibrant. But there was also a new intensity in her eyes, a fierce determination that hadn't been there before. Riley's life revolved around Miko. She made sure Miko was safe and well-fed, and she spent every moment she could with her. But Riley's obsession with keeping Miko safe began to take a toll on her. She started isolating herself from her friends and stopped going to school regularly. She couldn't risk anyone finding out about Miko. One night, Riley heard a noise outside the apartment. Her heart raced as she peered through the peephole. A man stood there, his face hidden in the shadows. He knocked again, louder this time.
Riley, open up. It's me, Alex.
Alex was a classmate of Riley's, one of the few people who had tried to befriend her. Riley hesitated, then slowly opened the door a crack.
What do you want, Alex?
She asked, her voice trembling.
I've been worried about you. You haven't been to school in days. Can I come in?
Riley's mind raced. She couldn't let him in. He might see Miko.
I'm fine, really. I've been sick.
Riley lied.
Riley, please. I'm just trying to help.
Alex insisted. Riley's eyes darted to the corner where Miko was hiding. The child's eyes were wide with fear. Riley knew she had to do something.
Alex, you need to leave. Now.
Riley said, her voice cold and firm. Alex looked hurt but nodded.
Okay, but if you need anything, please call me.
As soon as he left, Riley locked the door and hugged Miko tightly.
It's okay, Miko. I won't let anyone take you away.
Riley's paranoia grew. She became obsessed with the idea that someone would come and take Miko away. She started locking the doors and windows, checking them multiple times before going to bed. She even quit her part-time job to stay home and watch over Miko. The apartment, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. Riley's mind spiraled into darkness, and she started having nightmares. In her dreams, shadowy figures would break into the apartment and snatch Miko away, leaving Riley helpless and alone. One particularly stormy night, Riley awoke to the sound of Miko crying. She rushed to the child's side and held her tightly, whispering soothing words. As she rocked Miko back and forth, she glanced out the window and saw a figure standing in the rain, staring up at their apartment. Riley's blood ran cold. She couldn't see the person's face, but she knew they were there for Miko. Panic set in, and Riley grabbed a kitchen knife, her hands trembling. The following day, Riley's paranoia reached its peak. She decided she needed to confront the person watching them. That evening, she told Miko to hide under the table because she doesn't want her to get hurt. Armed with the knife, Riley waited in the darkened apartment. Her heart pounded in her chest as she heard footsteps approaching. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door creaked open. Riley lunged, the knife raised, but stopped short when she saw who it was.
Alex, what are you doing here?
Riley demanded, raising the knife more threatening. Alex.
Stop. I've been worried about you, Riley. You're not yourself. I know something's wrong, and I want to help.
Alex said, his voice filled with concern and fear. Riley's eyes narrowed.
Help? You don't understand. I'm doing this for Miko. I have to protect her.
Riley, you're scaring me. Who is Miko? You've been alone in this apartment for weeks.
Alex said gently. Riley felt the world span around her. She shook her head violently.
No, she's real. I have to protect her.
But as Alex reached out to her, Riley felt a sudden clarity. She looked around the apartment and saw it for what it was: empty, cold, and dark. There was no sign of Miko. The child she had sworn to protect didn't exist, or so they thought. Riley collapsed to the floor, the knife clattering beside her. Tears streamed down her face as the truth sank in. Miko was a figment of her imagination, a coping mechanism for her loneliness. Alex knelt beside her, his presence a comforting anchor in the storm of Riley's mind.
It's okay, Riley. We'll get you the help you need.
Riley nodded, too exhausted to resist. She let Alex take her to the hospital, where she was admitted for psychiatric care. The doctors diagnosed her with severe dissociative disorder, brought on by years of neglect and abuse. Months passed, and Riley slowly began to heal. With therapy and medication, she started to confront the demons that had haunted her for so long. She returned to school, determined to rebuild her life, but then her neighbors within her apartment started smelling something rancid. It smelled like a mix of iron and rust, mixed with a rat's carcass. But Riley has no issue with this setup, as she knew what that stench was, and she actively takes pleasure of smelling whatever it is, as she knows, somewhere within her apartment, Miko is still there, inside a bloody drawer hidden within the walls of her home, to keep Miko safe and hers forever. Thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like and subscribe. I will see you again next week.